Welcome to the Char Chit Chat, a podcast exploring all things biochar related, coming to you from a small sheep and tree farm in the deep south of New Zealand. Thanks for joining me today, Trevor. I'd like to start with the question, who is Trevor Richards?
Hi, Dylan. Yeah, I'm a Kiwi tracking towards 68, born in the Waikato in Hamilton. Early training was in civil engineering. I had a career with the Ministry of Works as an engineering cadet, which led me to oil and gas eventually. The Ministry of Works got wound up and carved up, and I was in Tikawiti at the time, and I took the opportunity to take voluntary severance and pursue my OE ambitions. Like most Kiwis, I was already about 28 then, but I'd done a bit of sailing, so I left New Zealand by yacht and sailed around the Pacific for 18 months, I think, before I finally landed in the UK. But sailed Pacific, Australia, worked in Australia a little bit. Got back on a yacht through in parts of Southeast Asia, a bit of overland travel, UK, and about just as the Berlin Wall was falling down. So that was what, 1990, and fell back into oil and gas work over there, which took me to various places. And finally to Southeast Asia. I took up a role as an engineering manager with a small JV here in Kuala Lumpur in 1996. Eventually got out of oil and gas about, say, 2000. And I was then started getting my first taste for thermal processes. I was working with a company trying to develop a plasma gasification project here in Southeast Asia. I was also pursuing some personal entrepreneurial ambitions to do with coastal erosion. And then a friend in New Zealand who's also on the committee of Simon Dave, the Biochar Committee, he introduced me to pyrolysis in January 2009. Yeah, I grabbed hold of that subject and have been, it's been a passion ever since, really, here in Southeast Asia and in New Zealand. I think Simon and I went to the Gold Coast Conference in 2009, and we've been dabbling with biochar ever since.
Yeah. All right. You've answered the second question then. Third question. If a stranger asks you what biochar is, what do you tell them?
Charcoal destined for the soil is the easiest one. I think people are familiar with charcoal. They're not really familiar with how it's made, I guess. But yeah, carbon destined for things other than fuel is probably the easiest description, and you sort of expand your explanation from there.
Okay. What do you use biochar for?
Well, there's not much scope for it from the balcony of an apartment in Kuala Lumpur. So personally, I tend to use it when I'm in New Zealand, on my trips to New Zealand. So I've used it under tree planting. I've probably been more involved in its production than its uses. So I haven't got a long history in gardening or anything like that. So I'm more around the production side than the application side. It's all my application sides of it are more on theoretical, I guess.
Okay. And so then what is your favorite method of making biochar and why?
Well, I've dabbled with them all. We got into 200-litre drum T-lug gasifiers pretty quickly. We got into some big pit burns on this is with Simon again on the farm, retort methods in the stove. And then flame cap, of course, has sort of got hold of sort of community scale activities more. So my nephew, who's a bit of a dab hand with a welder, built a warm heart kiln, which is 2,000-litre kiln, which is just another flavour of Contiki or flame cap. So I would say most of the impact is around flame cap, but tried them all.
Okay. Can you describe to us what the flame heart is in a bit more detail? Because I haven't heard of that one.
A warm heart. Okay. Warm heart is probably a bit of branding, really. It came out of Dr. Carl Frogner's activities in northern Thailand. And Warm Heart is an organization up there that works with rural communities and runs an orphanage and stuff. And Dr. Michael Schaefer and his wife run that, and I got involved with workshops. We did a workshop with them up in Thailand. We brought people up from Malaysia. There's a whole range of warm heart kilns that Carl designed. What a clever designer. And he made them all freely available. And the big one, the 2,000 litre one, cleverly uses 3 sheets of steel to fabricate it with a bit of tubing. So it's pretty efficient in material use, and quite you can still carry it around. You lift it up on the back of a truck, 2 of you. So we built one of those. It's been used a little bit. It's sat around for too long and got a bit rusty.
Okay, can you describe the shape of it?
Yeah, it's a bit like a trough. So, as I say, there are various sizes. Some of them, depending on the biomass, they've targeted solutions for biomass. So, one of the stranger designs is for bamboo, and it's 5 meters long, and it's quite narrow and small, bit like an animal trough. And you light it in various places along it, and then you can burn 5 meter lengths of bamboo without chopping them up. Others are more chunky, others are smaller with, 1 sheet of steel. It's all designed around the utilization of standard steel sheet sizes, 2.4 by 1.2. So there's pictures of them on the internet, and the designs are all freely available on the internet as well.
Yeah. So if you say it's a trough design or shape, would that be similar to a bath shape then?
Yep, exactly. You can bottom flood it.
Yeah. All right, so you haven't got a clear favorite then? You don't really care about the method as long as it's making good char?
I don't care about the method as long as it suits the biomass. So that's the key for me. If you've got, if you want to reduce the amount of chainsaw work and you've got larger material, then obviously you need either a larger piece of equipment, or you need a pit in the ground, or some sort of construction. I'm all for pits in the ground as well, of course. As you know, from the wilding experience we had down there, I think that could be very suitable for some circumstances as well. So yeah, it's just about designing the equipment around the biomass, and that might mean that a T-lard is the best choice, or potentially a retort might be a better choice for certain materials. So it's all about the biomass.
Yeah. All right. Can you go into that wilding example a little bit more for people that don't know anything about it? Just give us a general overview of what it's about and how it went.
So we targeted the opportunity around wilding pine a long time ago, and that led to some support around Twizel from landowners around there, one in particular. And we managed to get his support to fund a workshop in Twizel. Phil Stevens, the chair, gave a talk. Ben Elms and his buddy prepared the ground and brought some equipment up, and we demonstrated a pit burn, not a big one, but enough to demonstrate how a pit burn would work. Plus, they had their Contikis there as well. We were also at the same time designed a pit arrangement next to the windrows. So wilding pine, some mature wilding pine had been poisoned and then bulldozed into windrows in certain areas of Twizel. So there were kilometres of very large scale biomass windrows sitting there rotting, or sometimes being burnt. And so we tried to design a pit methodology, almost sort of semi-continuous pit methodology, and work the pit alongside the windrows. It got some interest. We've been in discussions with Scion and Doc and others, but we've never managed to get a larger scale trial organised on the back of the workshop. But we continue to hope that either the wilding pine management community or some government agency or other, or council, can support a project that's already been designed, really, but we've never really been able to test it properly. we can cover the pit back up with earth and we could mine the biochar out of it later, and far better outcome for the environment with that. But we need to demonstrate how it might work and the economics for it.
Yeah, talk us through a little bit more about your design that you had.
I envisaged a couple of big machines operating near a windrow. So we'd excavate a trench that was of a suitable size for the amount of biomass we had in the windrow, which we'd need to try and measure. It would be done in a daily burn arrangement. So you'd prepare a large pile burn inside the bottom of the trench. You'd fire it in the morning, and then one excavator would be feeding that fire all day with the material adjacent in the windrow, and maybe while another machine was preparing the extension of the pit next door for the following amount, maybe like 10 or 20 meters of pit. And at the end of the day, the pit would be covered over, and preparation for the following day would be made by, again, building your pile burn for the following morning. So you just keep rolling daily, just covering it at the end of the day. And then eventually, it's going to take a while to cool from our experience from these big pits, but you could come back and potentially mine it out later, use it in the local landscape, or see what qualities you have and see if it's available for some sort of commercial application.
Mm-hmm. And what's your gut feeling about the economics of it? Like, if a private landholder had to fund this instead of just walking around with a blowtorch and burning all of it, what's the economics of it? Would the sale of that biochar or its application to their land, would that actually pay for all the excavator work?
Well, according to my numbers, yes. But again, it depends. We've got the struggle of developing an economic value for biochar. Potentially has a carbon value as well, of course, and that could have also been tested. But yeah, I did crunch numbers on that. Yeah, I think it's stacked up, and we have to find some, either markets for it, or it has to be valued into the landscape if it's going to be left behind. What's that land going to be used for? If it's a private landowner, it's probably more around pasture development and so forth, as opposed to natural landscapes. So, but if DOC was the client, for instance, what would they do with it? Would they apply it to their landscape, or would they want to try and cover operating costs by trying to sell it? So it would be very location specific, I think, and terrain specific. So it's only going to work in certain terrain areas. Otherwise, you're starting to move a lot of wilding biomass around. We also looked at the cost of sending a team with a mobile contikis into the landscape, and seeing if that stacked up as well. I'll crunch numbers on that as well. And Ben Elms and so forth have been down in that area, and they've done quite a bit of work in the landscape, mainly for orchards and vineyards. So again, it's another thing that would be worthy of testing. And I did listen to a recent Radio New Zealand talk where I think it came out of the recent Wilding Conference, which has just finished. I know Raymond Dobby was there with his air curtain burner, wasn't with his air curtain burner, but he's talking about his air curtain burner down there. And we've had attendance at previous conferences as well. And I think that needs to be tested as well. And one of the things that came out of the conference from the talk was that one of the problems about the reseeding of wilding pine, Contorta is considered to be the worst species, but there are about 8 or 10 different species. There's already a New Zealand discussion post-conference on this. Even Pinus radiata can be the wrong tree in the wrong place when it comes to seeding, I think. But certainly Contorta is a real bad one. The seeding problem is more around the cones being left behind in the environment, and they can sit in the environment for 5 or 10 years or more without rotting away and still be viable, and then they break up and then they get spread. So if we're out there disposing of wilding material and burning it, we would be able to maybe solve that reseeding problem as well.
Yeah. How do you see the air curtain burner working in that sort of wilding pine scenario, say, that we were seeing there at Twizel? Would it be a similar thing to what you described before, where the air curtain burner is sort of moved down along the windrow and then an excavator is putting the material in as it's moving along? Is that how you envisioned it?
Yeah. That definitely needs testing, and it'd be great to test them next to each other. I'm sure Raymond would be keen on that one.
What's the benefit of his machine?
I've looked at them, and I think they're a great device. Came from a biomass disposal world, and they've been around a long time for that. It's only the extraction of carbon from the bottom of them that's new, and a few companies in America that have got commercial equipment doing that, and Raymond's picked up the challenge here in New Zealand. I don't know who else is doing. He's the only person outside of America that I know that's gone for it, and I think productivity-wise, it's a bit of a compromise, but the advantage is you don't have to do a lot of biomass prep because of the extreme conditions you can create in an air curtain burner. You can deal to a lot of wet material and fresh cut material. Once it's up and humming, it will absorb a lot of that. But of course, you're just not going to have the same amount of carbon coming out the bottom, but you're also disposing of that biomass in a very clean way. So there are other scenarios where I think it'd be brilliant. For instance, the problems they've had in beached biomass, it could be ideal for those emergency scenarios. It could be great for something like disposal of carcasses in an emergency, foot and mouth or something like that. I think there are many applications where it could be a fantastic tool.
So if the air curtain burner was going alongside those windrows of stuff, you're saying that it's going to produce less yield, less biochar at the end, but it's going to burn anything that it does burn much cleaner because it's having the air forced into it. Is that correct?
Yeah, yeah. I'm sure his equipment would be much more versatile than the pit burn because we would be looking for dry material. We'd be looking for some fairly uniform and clean material. We want to make a nice pile in the bottom of the pit every day to kick it off in a hurry. We could deal with some big material in a pit over 6 or 8 hours. You can deal with some big logs, but he's going to process them much faster and potentially a bit more clean as well. We're always going to have a little bit of smoke when you're dropping stuff in on a flame cap system using a big machine. He can control that a lot better with an air curtain, so his emissions management probably be a bit better.
Yeah, all right. I should try and get him on the podcast soon and explore that machine and what it's for and all that, and what his plans are for it. Can I ask the next question then? Why are you hooked by biochar?
Well, certainly solves a lot of issues around agricultural problems and biomass management and carbon. I mean, I'm quite interested in the carbon side of things and climate and so forth. It's certainly an important player currently in that area. It's certainly by far the leading solution for carbon dioxide removal right now. It's not attracting the money of other things that are a bit sexier, like direct air capture and so forth seems to soak up all the money, but I don't think they'll ever be really economic. And I think things like biochar and maybe enhanced rock weathering and some other solutions are going to be much better for the overall for solving these problems.
Yeah. Now, you are involved with some biochar projects in Asia. Would you like to talk a little bit about any of those projects? Is there one, for example, involving cleaning up water with biochar?
I'm not directly involved with one like that, but I've certainly been trying to raise the profile of biochar here in Malaysia and Southeast Asia. My connection here dates back to probably, well, very quickly after 2009 and getting involved in New Zealand. I brought the idea back here as well and attended my first conference here with Johannes Lehmann, who's sort of one of the godfathers of biochar out of Cornell University. He was a keynote at a conference here probably in 2010.
Mm-hmm.
And I was already connected here with the carbon industry, so charcoal and so forth. So there's a export market of charcoal from Southeast Asia, mainly Indonesia and Malaysia, going off to Japan and Korea and so forth, restaurant trade and so forth. It sucks up a lot of charcoal. And the charcoal production here is historically come from sort of some sustainable, some not so sustainable sources. And in its history dates back to sort of Japan in the Second World War, where they introduced charcoal making techniques. Those techniques still survive here in Southeast Asia, but there is quite a push now to try and clean up with different technologies. So I was involved there in that production and export of carbons. And when you're making these sorts of products, there are always a lot of crumbs around, and they were being even utilised in agriculture, but no one was calling it biochar.
Okay.
So things like the rice industry would burn their own rice husk for the drying of rice. So they used a small portion of it for drying. The material from that was sort of semi-burnt, but carbonised effectively. So that was being used in agriculture already as a growing media. So that has a portion of, you could claim to be biochar in it. So there was some history of it here. We've been trying to get things moving here in Southeast Asia. We've imported products, carbonised coconut material for a Singapore green roof contractor. They were developing a nursery for when they wanted to use a lot of biochar in their roofing landscapes for lightweight soils.
Wow. Yeah, investigating green roofs was actually what got me into permaculture originally, because I was living in Taiwan and I lived in an apartment, not as big as your one. Mine was only 22 or 24 stories high, but it was 6 years old, and it had been designed so that you could have some gardens at the top, kind of like in smallish beds, but all around the edge of it, there should have been some soil and some plants, and there was nothing. And so I was sort of asking questions of why they haven't put anything in there and so on. And I had to research to kind of ask the right questions. So I was right into, what do you grow and what substrates do you use and all these kinds of things. So, but then permaculture kind of kept coming up, and they deflected my questions and my persistence and gave me a little plot of land next to the apartment block. And that kind of shut me up, and then I had to clean that up and start growing stuff. And so that was me away into permaculture, and I kind of forgot about the green roofs. And when I did research on the green roofs, biochar didn't really come up at that stage, but it was, when was that? That was like 2008 or 9 or something like that. So yeah, it wasn't so well known there.
Well, the company that we were working with is headquartered in Singapore, and they've done some huge projects down there, and they're called Uniseal. I think you can find them on the internet. And they've designed their own roofing systems, but a lot of it includes biochar. So, and being in Singapore, they need to source their biochar. So I think they've probably got a few more options these days. But they were a great potential user for the urban environment. But yeah, that's one of the areas in the urban environment it can be used. So there are so many.
Yeah. I saw recently that Singapore seems to have really caught on with the biochar thing. I see that they're whichever part of the government deals with the gardens and cleaning up all the branches, and they're using all that green waste and turning it into biochar.
Well, I can tell you a story.
Go for it.
Yeah, because I mean, when Singapore is a neighbour, so it was always near me. So I engaged with Singapore fairly quickly after I found about biochar, and there were certain academics down there that were interested in working on it, and there was a doctor from the Parks Department. It's called the Parks Department down there, and he was doing research on it. So the first lot of biochar that I arranged to be imported into the region came from Australia, actually. Barry Batchelor was making biochar very early on in Australia using a small multi-hearth kiln. And I managed to get Uniseal and the Parks Department and some academics in Malaysia to sponsor the importation of a container of very expensive biochar away from Australia. And most of it went to Uniseal, some went to the Parks Department in Singapore, and some went to academic institute here in Malaysia. That was one of my first attempts to move it around, and I stayed connected with Singapore and the people down there quite a lot, and there were mainly academics trying to engage on biochar, and we tried to help them pull together a industry body down there, which was more around landscape architects and so forth. So I went to a few meetings down in Singapore and a couple of conferences. And then Han Wei, an academic down there, was working on how its addition to cement and concrete and so forth. So that he's become a key player internationally in biochar into concrete and cement. I think he's now fairly senior with IBI, the International Biochar Initiative. I think he's on their board or something. So met him, and yeah, Singapore's done some great things down there on the built environment, but they've struggled to make their own. One of the issues about Singapore is they have a lot of incinerators down there, and they solve a lot of their biomass and residue issues with some rather large incinerators that they extract heat and energy from. So it's sunk cost having a large incinerator, so they want to keep feeding it. So they do. So I wouldn't say their waste management systems are ideal. They've got a huge amount of trees in Singapore, and they're well looked after, but they were never that good at making compost. And they did try and so a couple of companies were trying to make biochar out of it, but the costs were so high in Singapore that they tended to move out into Johor in the southern part of Malaysia to operate more cheaply. There's not a lot of biochar production, I don't think, coming out of Singapore. There never will be, but there's certainly a great market for it.
Okay. Well, a little bit's better than none, isn't it? Yeah, I used to live in Singapore as well for 2 years.
Okay.
I know that area quite well, and yeah, I remember there being a lot of biomass there, but yeah, it's understandable if they already have it earmarked to go into the incinerations for heat and electricity. And how's progress in Malaysia going? Have you got some projects there that you're working on?
There is a biochar industry group here in Malaysia. It was more academics again that initiated it with a bit of funding from one of the plantation companies, I think. And I got involved in that early on. The industry side of things in Malaysia is certainly taking off now. There's probably 2, 3, 4, 5 commercial operations, either in East Malaysia, which is Sabah, Sarawak, or Peninsular Malaysia. There are some gasifiers, there are some pyrolysis equipment. It's hard to follow, it's hard to know who's doing what. You could also say that about New Zealand, I guess, in some ways. But
Yes.
I find it harder here to know exactly where we are. We see press releases occasionally about commercial systems and carbon trading and various things popping up here and there. So it's certainly a lot more than it used to be. So yeah, I'm quite optimistic. And the other carbon side of things is that there is a lot of historic charcoal production. There's an awful lot of biomass available. So what's missing is the same thing that's missing in New Zealand is acceptance from the agricultural and environmental sectors to buy and use the stuff. There's a lot more work needed there. There's a lot of plantation biomass in this country, in Malaysia, and really we haven't got things rolling here around acceptance or understanding of what biochar is and how it could modify their plantation management systems.
All right. Would you like to talk a little bit about your role with Biochar Network New Zealand?
I was a founder member, like half the current committee. Dennis Enright and I attended a Australian conference, and Dennis and I talked about the need at that time for a biochar organisation. I think it was about 2014. And then we started making plans for that. And then we went to the conference and discovered that Don had actually had ambitions as well. So we ended up with a bit of a conflict in the beginning between ANZBIC and BNNZ with sort of around branding and New Zealand coverage. We got that sorted out in the end. It took a little while, but I've been secretary. 2019, I think. I remember the starting date, but I've been secretary of the organisation since it started, and which is a very bad move because nobody wants to be secretary of anything. So I'm having trouble getting some churn on that job. But yeah, maybe we can find somebody keen in the audience to try their hand at being the secretary of something.
Mm-hmm. Well, what do you have to do as the secretary? What are you tasked with?
I suppose we have our monthly meetings. I maintain some records related to membership records and so forth, and financial records. I'm connected with those. We still have a treasurer and so forth. But actually, a lot of the work I do is probably more around the magazine. So I kicked off writing about biochar about 2013, I think, and that sort of morphed into a monthly newsletter. And then when we started the BNNZ, we've never really had the resources to migrate the newsletter across. So I've carried on doing that off my own bat. So that takes a few days a month as the end of the month approaches. So yeah, that's got quite a lot of my focus, the magazine. So it's affiliated. So I guess you could say that it's part of my role at BNNZ. Hopefully one day, if BNNZ is well resourced, we can do things a bit more professionally and improve our game when it comes to the magazine and so forth. It's a bit rough and ready now, but we've got about 500 or 600 people receiving it, so it's getting more. It's got a broader coverage than the BNNZ membership, which is 50 or 60 people, and but we've lost probably 100 over the years. People coming and going.
Okay, I don't think you've sold the role there, Trevor.
No, you're pitching it very well.
It sound like it's too much work.
No, well, see, one day it'll be a high-paying role. We'll have some professionals in there like you, and you'll want to do it, or it'll be your day job. How's that sound?
Possibly. I've done newsletters before, and I know it's a lot of work.
Yeah.
It sounds simple, but it's not so simple. And
No,
finding the
that's right.
content, getting people to contribute, it's not so easy.
I'd probably get some pleasure out of pulling it all together, and it's sort of a good archive of what's going on in New Zealand now, really. So I also post to other, we also kicked off a discussion group. I'm generally posting information there, and we also have Facebook and LinkedIn. So, I'm not the only one posting, but generally it's pretty easy to post to something like Facebook. So that's more international stories I throw in there that might be of interest to the New Zealand audience. LinkedIn, probably a little bit more business focused. Again, not necessarily New Zealand stories, but something that might interest the New Zealand side. And the discussion group occasionally sparked some interesting discussions.
Yeah, no, I'd like to say that the newsletter is very important. And like you say, it gives a place that people can go back and have a look through. It's an archive, it's history. And
Yep.
I know sometimes it's a bit thankless, but it's appreciated, I think, by probably more people than what you know. I appreciate it, put it that way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, talking about the history, I think people probably not aware that New Zealand had connections into the origins of biochar, the modern origins, I mean. There was a character called Dr. Peter Reid, who was an academic at Massey University, and he got involved with the whole thing when people were looking at terra preta and the origins of this subject. And I think he was probably involved in the very first conference, which I think was in Australia. It was about 2005 or something, or 7. I'm not quite sure, 2005. And they discovered that they couldn't use the word agri-char, which was their first target. And so the rumour has it that Peter Reid dreamed up the word biochar at that point. He passed away a long time ago while travelling, I think, connected to biochar. There was some requiem written about him internationally on his involvement in the origins of research in the subject. Then the origins of the New Zealand Biochar Research Centre, we had Dr. Peter Winsley in Wellington, I think was an academic there that helped pull together the funding and the structure that led to the New Zealand Biochar Research Centre. which was bid on by about 3 or 4 research groups and won by Massey University, and ticked over for 10 or so years, as probably a few people know, and then sort of died slowly with a lack of funding and support from government. And it was active while it had funding, and generated a lot of PhDs. PhDs came out of that while it was around, and did a lot of foundational research and so forth. But unfortunately, it didn't lead to general awareness in the industry sector, agricultural industry or any other industry, or even the government sector, regional or central. So it sort of failed to meet that goal, but it did sort of roll into some interest from a few people that led to BNNZ.
Can you put your finger on why you think it didn't have more success?
Well, do we have to define success? I suppose part of their remit I understood was this engagement side of things with industry, but I don't think that ever worked. There were a couple of academics that were leading it, Marta Camps and Jim Jones, and I think one was on the sort of more chemistry production side, the other on soils. Certainly Marta was involved and active internationally with the IBI for a long time as well while she was there. But yeah, maybe it was just the timing. We didn't have the commercial players at the time. So Jim designed through one of the students, I think, the student program, there was a PhD on it, I think, or a master's, on designing a kiln that was supposedly farm scale for farmers. That was about 2013. You can find papers on that. But again, I don't think it was suitable. It was always going to cost too much, the design of it. And it was well before the excitement around just simple flame cap technology kicked off. So he designed a beautiful machine with amazing environmental monitoring and everything like that. But I don't think it was going to be a practical tool that farmers would buy or be able to buy. So I think it's still Massey. Massey, I don't know whether they use it for research. I think it did a lot of research work. Probably produced a lovely biochar. So I don't really know what the history of that thing is now.
Oh, so you actually did build the kiln?
Yes, we went down and we went to kick the tyres on the thing before it started work. And I found the master's student paper on it, which has got all the design drawings at the back of it. So it's probably all freely available, but I don't know that anybody would be building them.
Yeah. Well, that sounds like a good article to put in the newsletter, Trevor. I'm interested to see that.
Yeah, possibly. We could spring some links to that report. Unfortunately, I have not seen an archive of all the work that came out of NZBRC. Towards the end, they did produce a consolidating report that went to the New Zealand Greenhouse Gas Research Centre for extended funding and stuff, and was rejected, as far as I know. They didn't win their funding, and I know, certainly talking to Marta, she was upset they didn't get more funds, but they were effectively cut off from from extending their work. So they only carried on ticking over then with foreign students coming in with bringing funding to do a PhD related to biochar. There was no more government funding for it, so eventually it was just all shut down. So it'd be interesting to know what the full list of PhDs related to biochar were produced and the research work that came out of it.
Yeah.
But it's not the only university doing work on biochar. I mean, Auckland is doing all sorts of stuff now. I know that because we've had some contact with Auckland. It's not very transparent from the point of view of going to a university website and listing all the activity they've done and are doing around something like biochar. That's what would be very helpful if they had a focus on it like that. I know Waikato's done work as well, of course. I think Lincoln has a long history of research work on soils and agriculture related to biochar, particularly around nitrous oxide, urine patching and stuff like that, doing some of the leading work in the world on that. Professor Leo Condren and others. So yeah, there's a lot of history in New Zealand on biochar research, but you won't find it in one place. And easy to review, which is a bit of a shame.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I'm doing some research for BNNZ, and I find it continually frustrating how so many of the academic papers are behind paywalls. And I wonder if it's similar for this New Zealand stuff. I mean, if you wanted to find academic papers from Massey or Auckland, are they behind paywalls or are they freely accessible?
No, I don't think generally they are. You know what it's like with biochar and research papers. It's just, there's 20 or 30,000 of them out there now. What I've done, I was trying to keep a copy of things that interested me, but my interests are so broad and the content is so prolific that I've
Mm,
given up quite a while ago. So all I do now is keep a record of meta-analysis. What I'm doing is I always keeping my ear to the ground for any biochar related meta-analysis. And
mm,
so, in other words, somebody's picked a subject within biochar and has gone out and researched all the papers available at that particular time and pulled it together into a unified report. And of course, they have the links to every paper that they've studied in their references at the end of the document. So I'm up to about 72 meta-analysis now on biochar. So I have a table of those happy to share with you. And that includes a few on biochar animal feeds, which is, a pet subject of mine, and I know something that you're looking at, and is a potentially the best pathway for New Zealand's pastoral-based agriculture. That's probably the best way to make an impact with biochar.
yes, I agree. Yeah. All right. Cool. Yeah, it's these kinds of things that we could also look at putting on the website, maybe.
Yeah, I mean, there are so many industry groups and community organisations that we can collaborate with potentially. We just haven't had the resources to make a huge amount of impact. But you go through a list of where biochar can make a substantial impact, and we should be having a dialogue. It's a rather long list. We've done work on the compost sector. You probably know more about that than me, and you started looking at a composting database for engagement, and that's something that would be great to get funded. But composting is obviously a logical pathway for biochar, and we need trials, we need training, education. There's so much to do in the composting sector. I'll go through a few more till you get tired. BANZ, Bioenergy Association of New Zealand. They're the experts on biomass and focus on bioenergy, of course. And that's a flavour of, that's a hot topic right now. There's a new report out about biomass energy that's getting quite a bit of critique, and I'm going to write something about it in the newsletter. But, we've collaborated with BANZ in the past. We've produced a couple of white papers, one on biocoal and one on biochar. But more engagement is needed there. Water industry, just so many ways we should be engaging with the water industry in New Zealand with all the issues it has. Obvious ones are biochar being added to anaerobic digestion systems to enhance methane recovery. There's sludge management for the end of life of the back end of AD systems. There's a lot of work going on internationally about processing sludges using pyrolysis. Water polishing and water cleanup before discharge is clearly we could be doing a lot with that with the water industry and all these small scale systems that are around the country processing biosolids, but doing it badly. Biochar could be part of those low cost solutions in rural New Zealand. I think you've got the forestry sector and our engagement with Farm Forest Association. We've been wanting to do workshops and so forth with them. You've got all the agricultural organisations that we've had some connection with, like Foundation of Arable Research and all their grains, hemp industry, miscanthus, hops growing. We've had quite a bit of activity going with the wine industry and the kiwi fruit, avocado. We could be engaging with all these groups, short white papers on how biochar impacts on all these different sectors. We talked about wilding pine, lake cleanup. It's a real interesting one that I think we could do a lot more because of the nutrient loading that's going into small lakes and stuff around the country and causing algal blooms and problems. Well, there's a lot of evidence for our biochar can help sort of capture those nutrients in the lake. It's a bit of a bottom of the cliff solution, but we can help with the cleanup for sure.
Yeah.
Golf industry, kauri dieback. We've tried engaging with organisations connected with soil, like New Zealand Soil Scientists Society. We haven't really got a dialogue going with them. There's so many points of contact that we can keep trying to do, but I think we need more help. We need a few more people involved in what we're trying to do, and with a bit of time and a bit of ambition to do some of these things. And that's even without regional groups, right? So we know that biochar's stronger in some regions than others. And it'd be really nice if we could get more regional activity going and feeding back to a central location so we could support regional activity. And so people didn't want to be so close to the centre and something like BNNZ, they could certainly get involved in their region, whether it's sort of community or farm scale or whatever.
Yeah. Is there anything else that you would like to chat about today?
I think the only thing would be, as an organisation, we know we've got a lot to do, and we've been talking about, our strategy and growth a lot recently, and particularly around our relationship with ANZBIG, and how ANZBIG is in a position to support their industry development in Australia, but we need to hopefully draw them over to support what we need to do to support industry development here in New Zealand, because it's certainly kicking off with or without BNNZ. There are people that are building equipment, looking at business models and investing. So if we're going to be relevant, we need to get ourselves a little more organised on the commercial side. But we had a bit of a mini symposium already on the back of Juice to Revenue's conference in Rotorua just recently. So last Friday they had a half day, which I attended remotely and was marketed a little bit, and a few people came to that, and that looks promising. MPI and other government agencies were there, and they got a chance to hear a pitch from various sectors on various subjects. So I think it went well, and we hope to hear more about that very soon. But yeah, we need a strategy development exercise again, I think. Hopefully there are people out there that have the time and inclination to do more, and maybe and just haven't found a way of engaging with us or putting their hand up, and agreeing to be on a committee is often that it might be more about just wanting an easy way to have the discussion.
Yeah. For me, it's important that there's an obvious kind of list of things to do. And so then someone can see, oh, that point number 5 there, yep, I can do that, and I'll take it and go with it and do it. I'd quite like to see a list of all the things that need to be done, and then people know, oh, yep, my talents match that. I'll give that a go. Just another option, another idea.
Yep. We need a lot more trees on farms. And the more trees we see in the ground, the more opportunity there is to turn biomass into something beautiful like biochar.
Yeah, I agree. All right, that's a really nice way to end. Thanks so much for your time today, Trevor.
Thank you for the chat, Dylan. It's been great.